These military shots may look Soviet, but they're not. This is Latvia, a tiny Baltic country that broke free politically of Soviet rule in 1991. Eight years later, a new leader came to power, the first woman ever. Her name is Vaira Vike Frieberga. Before becoming head of state, she had no political experience and didn't even live in Latvia. Her political style is unusual. She's been called everything from an iron lady to a white witch. The circumstances and story of Freiberga coming to power are fascinating and bizarre. They involve showdowns with Russia, power politics, mysticism, even hope. And probably the fastest rise to power in political history.
La bienvenue chez vous. Nice to see you back in Canada. After 6 months in your country, you become the president. Took me 30 years here.
Sometimes they last the whole week. Very sturdy.
Until 1999, few had ever heard of Vaira Freiberga. She used to be a psychology professor, living in the suburbs of Montreal and spending summers in the country with her family.
I like cooking if I have the time for it. If I work 12-hour days, then I just as soon sit down at the table with a ready meal waiting for me.
Now she's the president of Latvia and the only female leader in Eastern Europe. And she's one of the most powerful women in the male-dominated world of politics today. Latvia is a democracy, where the people vote in parliamentary members in a general election. The parliament then elects the president.
Vaira Vike Frieberga ir ievēlēta par Latvijas valsts prezidenti.
On the night that Frieberga was made president in June 1999, she was up against some tough political opponents. Without any real experience in politics or with the media, it's little wonder she was overwhelmed. To the amazement of many, she won a rather stunning victory that night. Within weeks of being elected, Frieberga is transformed. The Canadian psychology professor look is gone. In its place is a Margaret Thatcher clone with bulletproof hair and stern clothes. Frieberga may not look the same, but she still thinks like a psychologist. To her, Latvia is a sick patient that needs treatment.
I think that psychological health is an essential part of good politics. If a nation is tied up in knots of negative thinking about itself, it's very much like a neurotic individual. And it's same in therapy, by the way, for patients. I think changing political systems in many ways is like going through therapy.
But therapy is painful. Changing Latvia will require extraordinary skills.
I think for the president, she's walking a very fine line. She has to do a balancing act. She has to be a politician, she has to be a head of state, and yet she's also a professor, a folklorist, and a person with emotional ties to the country.
A woman and an outsider, she faces the challenge of her life. And everyone is watching to see if she stumbles.
The world is changing all the time, obviously, but in these post-communist countries, we have to change faster. We have to catch up here again. And I think that here again, I can be a sort of messenger of Western values, of Western attitudes to things.
Welcome. Mr. President. Thank you for coming. Great to see you. You look great. Thank you.
Frieberga's foreign policy is bold and reform-minded. She dismays many European allies by supporting President Bush and the Iraq War.
That's right.
At the same time, she pushes Latvia towards NATO and the European Union. Her top aide, Martin Bondars, believes Freiberga's reforms are necessary because of Latvia's conquered past.
Simple. 900 years of Latvia, 870 of them under occupation. Number one issue in 900 years, security.
Clearly, Russia sees Freiberga's moves as cozying up to the West. She tries to keep her balance, with her new Western friends on one side and her old occupier on the other. On February 16, 2001, she meets Russian President Putin for the first time. The meeting is vital to Latvia's interests, but holds a lot of personal baggage for Frieberga. Her ability to never let down her guard is legendary. But after this high-stakes meeting, she lets her emotions show. Latvian businessman Davis Maksins.
And she was whisked from the airport after meeting Putin to this private apartment in downtown Riga for dinner with her friends. And as the story goes, she'd been came into the apartment, of course, the security people and etc. And all present applauded her. And of course, she had genuinely deserved that applause. And she'd sort of said, "Okay, friends, enough. Somebody pour me a cognac and just let me sit down for a minute." And she had tears in her eyes.
Frieberga's meeting with Putin is deemed a success by political insiders. Clearly, she was born with political legs. She'll need them for the storm that's coming. Death threats against her, rumors of a sex scandal involving her son, and constant battles against corruption. Madam President's country is about the size of New Brunswick and has a population of 2.5 million people. Throughout most of its history, Latvia has been dominated by other nations and its culture has been suppressed. Vaira is seen by many as a savior. Some Latvians believe becoming president was simply Frieberga's fate. Family friend Banuta Rubes.
The fact that Vaira was elected was seen as a very positive sign because a well-known clairvoyant in the 1930s had said that when Latvia would be ruled by a woman, Latvia would have happy times would arrive to this country.
When you see things falling together, when you see what's happened in the last 10 years, you're convinced that what's happening now is meant to be.
Frieberga had always hoped that one day she would be able to return to Latvia. She was a young girl when her family escaped. The invading Red Army was smashing its way into the Baltics. It was on the 1st of January 1945.
Starting a new year, and I somehow intuitively knew it. As we stood on the deck, and all the Latvians there were singing their national anthem and crying, everybody had this feeling that they were leaving their country and they didn't know when they would come back.
They left on the last ship that wasn't blown up. Like many children in Europe at the time, life became a desperate struggle. Living in refugee camps,
being transported in unheated trains in minus 30 to 35 degrees centigrade in the month of January. My little sister died 3 weeks after we had arrived there.
After years of facing poverty and hardship, the family eventually settles in Toronto. Vaira excels in school, and then, by accident, her life takes an eventful turn.
Ever since my sister died, I had this thought that I'd like to study medicine and save lives. I remember being short one course, and I thought, well, I should like to take philosophy, but I didn't know how to pronounce it.
The registrar has a long list of courses. Frieberga sees one on the list that starts with a P and ends with a Y.
So I pointed to that subject, which I thought was philosophy, and he says, oh yes, psychology, a very popular course. I think you'll enjoy it. And I did.
She marries Imants, another Latvian exile. Moving to Montreal, they raise 2 children. Vaira spends more than 40 years living, teaching, and writing books in Canada. But her heart is still in Latvia. In the late 1980s, perestroika comes, and with it comes Latvian independence. A hope is planted in Vaira's mind to go home. Freiberga couldn't have known it, but her country was waiting for her. She packs up her house in Montreal and moves into the presidential palace in Riga.
It's very important that our president came from Western countries, that she had already this born-in feeling or feel for democracy, for the things we are striving for in Latvia.
One of her first major functions is the presidential ball. Looking very much the head of state, Frieberga greets many new faces and some old friends. One of them is Vaira Vike. Vaira grew up in Montreal and is now the Eastern European head of one of the world's largest oil companies. In Latvia, she is known as the Dark Baroness, a reference to both oil and power.
Presidente Vaira Vike Freiberga.
Noslēdzam savas valsts dibināšanas.
Vaira believes Vaira faces impossible expectations.
As I relate this to you now, that brings goosebumps to me, is she had been elected, for a couple of weeks. The audience was everywhere, huge, thousands of people, and suddenly you saw Vaira, and everybody knew this was the new president. And without her being announced, there was applause. It was wonderful. It was just wonderful. She can't live up to that. Kind of emotion that went out to her was, this is our last chance of somebody saving the country and saving the people from this awful situation we're in, and make sure that any other occupants don't come marching, over the border again. And she will lead us like Jeanne d'Arc, into the Western societies. But it's inhumanly possible to rise up to being everybody's perfection. It's not possible, because there are political processes, there are other players, there are very dark forces with a heck of a lot more financial means to be in her way.
Despite the obstacles, Frieberga continues fighting the old way of doing things. Arriving at the ports of Riga, she speaks candidly with the port authorities about payoffs theft, and graft. Part of her visit includes an extensive tour of the harbor. Each year, over $10 billion worth of goods move through these ports. The people responsible for tracking these movements make an average of $350 a month. Too many succumb to temptation. Corruption is rampant. It's a common problem throughout the country.
We are a corruption-ridden country, starting from the top to last bureaucrat, police, everything.
Even Canadian-born business people are aware of the problem and its dangers.
I know that there are several parts of the government that can be paid off to make a decision. Any activities to try to modify the situation have very direct business repercussions, as my statements today on film will have.
The real organized crime is our political system. And the political system has been able to manipulate their connections in the Interior Ministry, which is the police and all of those structures. Doing this interview, if I were to say too much and eventually this tape would come back this way, I could lose my business. The tax department would be sent in, some kind of inspectors would be sent in, some false documents would be created, some would maybe talk about me being some kind of pervert.
While talk may be dangerous, Frieberga's only real weapon is her words. She adopts a take-no-prisoners attitude regarding corruption.
I disagree with the idea that power corrupts. I think it corrupts the corruptible.
There is a story about Vaira that, if it's true, reveals much about power and political manipulation in Latvia. Within weeks of coming to office, a political crisis erupts, and it falls to Frieberga to pick a new prime minister. As a newcomer, her power is tested. Supposedly, threats are made and rumors are spread involving Frieberga's son, Carlos.
One rumor which was recently spread about me was just so preposterous that it just almost made me laugh, actually.
One of the, I think, saddest stories that filtered through the system that came to me from a member of one of the leading political parties was of a strong, powerful oligarch in Latvia. His family himself being involved in all kinds of business, coming to Vaira and suggesting that the next prime minister should be someone he would like to see in place. And that should she not see it his way, then perhaps they would out her son. Out meaning suggest to the population at large that he's homosexual.
Although it's hardly the point, by all accounts, Carlos Frieberga is not even gay.
And I said, okay, well, if people really do want to think that about me, then let them do so, because I know what I am, and I have no problem with that if people want to think about me in a certain manner. The people who know me well know that I'm not the way that the people are trying to depict me.
All indication is that that's not true. But it indicates perhaps, one, the power that she has invested in her. But it also indicates the level of lowlife that inhabits the power structures of the country. And what they are willing to do. Let's not just look at the president of the country, let's look at the fact that she's a mother.
The personal attacks on Frieberga continue. She is accused of nepotism for hiring her son and criticized for buying a fancy new car. She goes on the offensive, pushing her reforms. As a precaution, her security is increased.
was a death threat against the whole family. Somebody wrote a letter saying they would knock off first her son Karlis and her husband Imants, and then her daughter Indra, and then finally herself, the president. And that they swore that they would do so.
If you're challenging existing structures, it can be a very dangerous activity. There are cases where the government, or at least a branch of government, is trying to clean up what goes on. Officials have been shot to death in plain daylight. Supreme Court justice being simply shot to death.
The judge recently killed was the victim of our corrupt society. It was very clearly shown how unprotected our people are. We still haven't captured and sentenced a single person for murdering innocent people.
Why are there huge and awful crimes in this country and nobody is incarcerated?
Under Soviet occupation, the Latvian language was banned. Russian was the official language. Frieberga is reinstating Latvian, making language the most controversial issue in the country.
We're on a knife's edge of survival here for the Latvian language and for the Latvian people. The independence didn't come a day too soon, I don't think. We now are left with this population who came here as conquerors. They came here as the master race.
Tonight, the president is helping celebrate the 100th anniversary of this Russian theater in Riga's Moscow district. It's all part of her attempt to start mending the huge rift between Russians and Latvians in the country.
Господа, просьба внимания и тишины.
On this evening, she attempts to speak their language publicly for the first time by reciting a famous Russian poem.
Театр уж полон, ложи, люши, партер и кресла, все кипит.
Many would ask, does she know us? She doesn't know the Russian language. She doesn't know our Soviet mentality. We are different, and she is from another world.
Nearly 1/3 of Latvia's population is Russian, but the lack of integration between the Latvian and Russian-speaking factions is pulling the country apart. Images like these get a lot of media attention.
Она президент всей Латвии, а не только депутатов этих из Сейма. То есть они что хотят, то и утверждают. Но она должна принимать все-таки во внимание народ, а не только тех 100 человек, которые находятся в Сейме.
Это международный язык. И как можно закрыть рот нам этому языку? Как? Как это можно?
To talk about the Russians as an oppressed minority in Latvia, as so often is done in the Western press, doesn't make any kind of sense. These people should come to Latvia and see who the oppressed minority really is.
The following interview from the BBC's Hard Talk was one of the most watched TV programs in Latvian history.
In Latvia, we have had a language that had lost its place in society after 50 years of Russification. The language law simply reinstates the rights of the Latvian language as the state language. It is analogous to Bill 101 that was passed in Quebec in order to restitute the rights of the French language under the overwhelming majority of an English-speaking continent. It worked in Quebec in order to restore the use of French in the public sphere. It's doing exactly that in Latvia. It's not a hardship to learn a language, you know. I think it's an enrichment.
There's no sense in which it's being used as an instrument to get revenge on the Russians for what they did
revenge
to you.
For what? How
for
do you
the
think
occupation,
you can pay,
for the 2 Soviet invasions,
how do you think you can pay back for your lost life, for your lost future, for the people who are killed and died of hunger and starvation out in the steppes? You think by asking them to learn the Latvian language, this is going to be revenge. It's silly.
You've brought out really what is the essence of my question is how much resentment there still is against the Russians.
There's amazingly little. I'm amazed to see how little there is. Well, I could see that Mr. Sebastian was trying to make me angry. He was making outrageous statements. He was being extremely aggressive. And I think he wanted me to lose my cool and to start flapping about and you know, trying to defend myself ineffectually. And I suppose to demolish me on screen, something to that effect. And I don't think he quite succeeded.
Among the Latvian-speaking population, Frieberga's ratings soar after the Hartog interview. This emboldens those who believe that the Latvian language must be protected at all costs.
There shouldn't be two official languages in Latvia. And people who want to live here, we accept it. They are welcomed, but they have to know something about this country, and they have to learn language. There's no compromise possible, not at any times anymore.
While Frieberga knows she needs to make peace, she may not be willing to take the most difficult steps.
I have spoken myself to her and I have suggested, let's make a round table. Let's talk with those people who were on both sides of the front. And she said, well, I'll never do that, because those people have done so much harm to my country. They made my parents leave the country, and she was very emotional about that.
But language isn't the only issue threatening the country. Poverty in Latvia is a grave concern, and the disparity between rich and poor is widening. At this Anglican church in Riga, Latvians line up for a hot meal.
Nē, es tik daudz negribu ēst, es vairāk atvedu bērnus paēst. Savus mazulīšus. Mums 7 bērni ģimenē, un mums tā trūcīgāk ir, un tāpēc mēs arī nākam šeit, un mēs ejam vēl uz otru baznīcu no rītiem pēc maizītes. Jā. Nu, vienmēr sakot, kaut kā iztikt vajag tautai. Tautai vajag iztikt.
The average Latvian has an income of about $250 a month. Many pensioners are living on far less, and nearly half the population is living below the poverty line.
This shouldn't be. Latvia is not a poor country. Now, of course, our political system has made us poor, but this is a reflection of the inadequacy and the incompetence and the really unconscionable moral failure of our political leaders.
The benefits of capitalism are slow to trickle down. The people are impatient, and Vaira's regal demeanor, an advantage at first, begins to work against her.
I certainly think that it would be of tremendous value for Vaira to go down into the streets and meet the disadvantaged, which are 80% of 90% perhaps of her population. Yet she has created a queen can't do that, and there are a lot of barriers between her and the people.
Another stereotype was that I couldn't possibly understand the poverty of people in Latvia. Well, one thing that they forget is that I spent a large part of my life in poverty, and that the years that I spent as a refugee child and the years in Morocco, believe you me, were no picnic. But of course, they don't know about that. Here I was from the privileged Western world, where I had lived, you see, in absolute ease and comfort and an excess of riches, you see. I couldn't possibly understand those poor, suffering Latvians who were living in poverty. Well, I must say that I know as much about poverty and about hunger and about cold as anybody alive, and more than I would ever like to know.
On this day, Frieberga tours the countryside, visiting farmers. They're all dressed up in their Sunday best to greet her.
Jo tiek ievest viena partija, tika ievest, pēc kāda brītiņa tika izdomāti jauni noteikumi.
But like most rural Latvians, they face grinding poverty and government indifference. Freiberga sometimes finds it exasperating to be blamed for problems she didn't create, but is expected to solve.
One man complained that a neighbor who has privatized his land and he now needs to dig a new well. He hasn't got the money. I cannot help him with his well. I think I got exasperated once and I said, I'm not Catherine the Great, you know. I'm not a Tsarina. I haven't got the resources that the Tsar used to have. And to say, yes, we want, you know, we're going to build a bridge here and a castle there and a school there.
Often working many weeks straight with little personal time, the pressure takes its toll on Vaira. On this evening, she stays home to organize her books. She is exhausted.
Boxes of books are hiding the other boxes with all sorts of things that one might need in daily life, and it's been sitting there since last November. I haven't had a chance to look at it or to find it. So, it's a bit tough.
It's been a long year.
There's never time for it. There's never any time.
While the workload never lets up, there are victories. In November 2002, Latvia passes the first crucial phase to get into the European Union. For Frieberga, it's a small step on a big journey.
I think ultimately it's a very lonely job being president, because you do have to take the decisions and be responsible for them as an individual. Nobody can do it in your place.
Frieberga is the world's leading authority on Latvian folklore. It may be one of the reasons she gets the highest ratings of any politician in the nation.
I hereby declare Baltica 2000 as officially opened.
Spirituality is a vital component in her unique political style. Seen more and more as a mother figure or healer, she uses her knowledge of mysticism both as a shield against her political opponents and as therapy to heal the wounds of her country.
I think one of the reasons people become fascinated by Vaira is when they sense or find out that she has a tremendous mystical side to her.
She's always had the inner strength, and I think she's got contact with the with the cosmic. And
she's a white witch in the best way that you can imagine a white witch to be.
Describing this woman as a white witch may seem strange to outsiders, but for most Latvians, the term is a positive recognition of power.
Latvians are Indo-Europeans that come from northern India and wandered the furthest north. There's an old Latvian religion that can be also drawn from the hundreds of thousands of folk songs that we have.
I'm not a theologian, but the same hope that people are seeking in Vaira Frieberga. It's the same kind of hope that they seek in the religions and the spirituality that they're encompassing.
As the last pagan country to become Christian in the 13th century, many Latvians still believe in the paranormal.
My deep understanding gives me an edge in having a deep sense for the Latvian soul, for the Latvian mentality, for what it means to be Latvian. Even if they're not interested in folklore, even if they don't even feel that it means much to them, they have bathed in it, you see, culturally. It's part of the culture. They're penetrated with it. They're soaked in it. And it has influenced their thinking.
Frieberga taps into the national psyche to help foster Latvian pride. On this summer evening, she gets Latvians to chant a mantra in unison.
Un ko mēs gribam, to mēs varam.
But nationalism can be a double-edged sword.
I think that she's trying to summon certain mental and spiritual powers. Now, as a trained historian, I also get uncomfortable with this because it makes me think of large rallies where people are raising their arms in united salute, appealing to the collective unconscious in a rather dangerous way.
So, you know, she's just a little off the wall. But it's nothing bad. People like Latvians who are off the wall.
Off the wall and still very popular. On this night in June 2003, Frieberga gets re-elected president. It's a cakewalk, with 94% of votes cast going her way. Latvian legends have long predicted a strong mother figure will lead Latvia out of darkness.
Vaira gives us the vision of possibility achieved, of possibilities come to fruition. She's, I don't think it strikes anybody as odd to see her as the president. Yes, she's the president, it's obvious. Who else would be?
She's the right person at the right time, and I think it's very rare that countries and people get the right people at the right time. So now it's her time to be under the sun.
Not bad for a woman who was teaching psychology and living the quiet life in the Canadian suburbs a few years back.
I think it doesn't so much matter how one got there. The important thing is how one copes once one gets there.
President Vaira Frieberga must choose her steps wisely as she faces the future. Even with a renewed mandate, it will take just about everything she's got to succeed.
So when I took this job, I found that walking along the seashore each night, even if it was midnight by then, and I had to walk in a complete dark, I felt that that was an excellent training for the job that I had undertaken, which is what I was doing. I was stepping into the dark and had to walk with absolute confidence that, yes, I would find solid ground under my feet and everything would turn out all right.